plans to take the solutions discussed back to her hometown to work towards a better future for young people. How good are those bios, hey? Incredible. So to kick us off, as mentioned, our first speaker, Ryan, is not here with us physically. I'm not going to mention why he's not here with us physically, but we send our wishes because I think we've all been through that before. You probably get the hint, 2020, 2021. But he's got a fantastic video. So I believe Ryan's video will play right behind my head. There we go. Round of applause for Ryan.
Every year, young Queenslanders feel less and less secure about our futures. Spend 10 minutes reading the news on any given morning and it's not hard to see why. We face an era of great social, political and economic uncertainty, confronted day in and day out with financial struggle, a fading Australian dream, social injustice and questions of global war. But perhaps more than any other modern crisis, it is climate change, the greatest and most guaranteed threat to our futures that holds the predominant place in young people's minds, with severe impacts on our collective psyche. The chronic fear of climate change is called eco-anxiety, and for the young Queenslanders of today, soon to inherit a gravely ill planet, it's taking its toll on a daily basis. So in my time this afternoon, I'd like to highlight the real impacts of eco-anxiety and emphasise the crucial solutions to it posed by climate action and youth agency. While visiting family last year, I had a simple but somewhat shocking interaction, discussing, as you can imagine, the latest natural disaster and Australia's most recent climate policy. I was asked by my 8-year-old cousin's parents to keep the topic of climate change away from young ears. It turns out not only was it something that played on my little cousin's mind often, he had been having nightmares over it. At the time I had never considered it, but climate anxiety among young children makes plenty of sense. Imagine the sense of confusion, dismay, and indeed fear that comes from learning that the world you have just come into will for the rest of your life become a less and less hospitable place to be. My personal experience with eco-anxiety came slightly later. Warnings of climate change have one impact, but the emotional effects of watching a slow environmental collapse begin in real time are entirely different. As we actually witness increasingly frequent, increasingly intense natural disasters, as actual data confirms that each month was really hotter than the last, climate change grows more tangible by the day. Anxiety shouldn't be a surprising result. The scars made on the front lines of extreme fires, floods and storms can run deep. Queenslanders know how to suffer through an unusually hot summer, but accepting that suffocating heat will do nothing but rise for the rest of our lifetimes is an entirely separate challenge. These anecdotal experiences reflect what is a truly widespread problem. Anywhere from 25 to 75% of young Australians suffer from some degree of eco-anxiety. And as the number of people directly impacted by the changing climate surges, the eco-anxiety crisis will surge too. Facing such a crisis, where do we look to for solutions? Well, first of all, there is clear scope for targeted policy addressing it. Young people, especially young children, need mechanisms in place to assist them in understanding their emotions and processing climate impacts when they do occur. But let me be very clear, eco-anxiety mustn't be used as an excuse to dial down or soften the climate conversation. And it cannot be addressed purely at the surface, disjoined from its cause. Instead, the solutions to eco-anxiety lie squarely in two elements: climate action and youth agency. It's often said that young people are passionate about climate change, but that description has always felt incomplete to me. For young Queenslanders, climate action is not a passion, it is an existential need. Framed like that, eco-anxiety falls into much clearer light. It's no wonder that in recent YouGov polling, 75% of eco-anxious young people cited government inaction as a leading contributor to their anxiety. In my view, a huge part of the problem, especially now that governments are taking action, is the easy framing of climate as, at the end of the day, a low-pressure policy issue now being dealt with. But allowing climate action to become a tick-in-the-box issue, when our futures fundamentally depend on the urgency and quality of policy today, only adds to the pervasive anxiety plaguing young Queenslanders. It is hard to argue that we're on track when March was 1.68 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. Nonetheless, hope is attainable. I recently had the privilege of hearing from Professor Jonathan Patz, a climate expert and former IPCC lead author. He emphasised that the solutions for climate change are emerging all the time, and not only are they necessary, they could represent an opportunity for medium-term economic profit. I find powerful accounts like his a source of immense hope for the future. Similarly, when young people see governments taking genuine, effective climate action, it goes a long way to alleviating the heavy weight of eco-anxiety. In Professor Pat's presentation, he also profoundly defined hope as possessing the agency to enact solutions. At this crucial point in history, young people need agency. We need the capacity to drive change at the pace desperately required. In my view, widespread youth agency comes in two steps. First, voice. Young Queenslanders have strong voices and need outlets to meaningfully share them. We need space to highlight our concerns, emphasise our needs, and consider solutions. But secondly, we don't just want to be heard, we need to be listened to. It is vital that our concerns are considered, understood, and incorporated into decision making, reflected not just in the words of those in power, but in their political priorities, their actions, and their sacrifices. For youth voice to truly become youth agency, we rely on you to listen. Before I conclude, I would like to make a brief point on legacy. Make no mistake, on the climate's current trajectory, today's decision makers will be remembered not by public image or profit margins, short-term policy successes or election victories. My generation will remember you by the world you leave behind. But it's the immense scale of the challenge that yields an immense opportunity. An opportunity to solve not just eco-anxiety, but a true global crisis, and create legacies that will endure decades to come. It's an opportunity that must be seized. The threat is clear, the solutions exist. Now is the time for action. Distinguished guests, fellow attendees, climate change sits undeniably amongst the biggest challenges of our lifetimes. And for young Queenslanders, it's easy to feel that we have been promised a broken world. The environmental fear and uncertainty that arises as a result is serious and endemic, and requires its own robust policy consideration. But eco-anxiety cannot be addressed in a vacuum. It must be solved at the source. Young Queenslanders need to know that you, our state's decision makers, are taking urgent, decisive, and outcome-focused climate action, which will preserve the world we are to inherit. On all youth issues, young Queenslanders must know that whether we hold a vote or not, you understand and are genuinely fighting for our needs. Youth Voice is at the very heart of that process, and so I'd like to thank you all for hearing us speak today. On behalf of over 1 million young Queenslanders, I hope that you choose to listen. Thank you.
Fantastic. I know